This is NAB Show Live.
Up, here we go. All right. You're watching NAB Live, brought to you by Broadcastbeat. I'm Steve Wong, a technologist that specializes in telco, media, and technology with DXC Technologies. And I'm really excited to have a guest, Richard Whittington, the Vice President of Media and Entertainment for SAP. Richard, thanks very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
So now, tell me about the bicycle charity that you're involved with, because that really got my interest, being an old bicyclist.
So when I'm not working, I like to give back, right? And I don't play golf anymore because it takes too long. So I got into cycling. And one of the things I've done is the San Francisco to San Diego down the coast route 10 times in a row.
San Francisco to San Diego on a bike.
628 miles.
Oh man, that just makes my back hurt thinking about it.
But you know, you're riding with a lot of people who have lost limbs through cancer or injury,
oh, wow, really?
Or servicemen who are rebounding. So it doesn't really matter that your legs hurt. So we raised about $1.5, $2 million for challenged athletes.
Wow.
So I've been doing that for, as I said, the last 10 years.
So not only are you humanitarian in general, but you help some of the most powerful people in Hollywood run their businesses also.
Yeah, it's funny, Nike just did a commercial about women, and the girl you see crying at the beginning is a challenged athlete called Sarah Reinston, who was told by a soccer coach, go play soccer on your own in the corner.
Oh, wow.
And she became the first woman single amputee to complete the Kona Ironman. And the scene where she is crying is the first time that she attempted. And
that's
they had
a serious race.
Yeah, and they had to pull her because she didn't make the cutoff time. So yeah, I mean, most of us would have a hard time with both limbs. She's got one limb. But it just puts things into perspective. It's a good reflective week. And you have to focus, otherwise you fall off.
Wow.
But yeah, thank you for asking.
Just can't imagine. Yeah, so again, great things that you do, and that's important, giving back to the community also.
Yeah. And I think it also kind of runs through our ethos at SAP. I mean, we're about not only making money, but also about making the world run better. And for my tiny corner of it in media, we're trying to make the world run better, be it help news companies deal with some of the issues that they're facing, or help broadcast and media companies move into a direct-to-consumer world.
So now tell me, if you're explaining to a 5-year-old, what is SAP and what does it have to do with media?
So it started 47 years ago. 5 guys took a risk in a garage in Mannheim in Germany to do enterprise resource planning. And we really got started in media about 15 years ago, helping some of the print companies. So if you're a 5-year-old, I would say we count the money in Hollywood, we get the newspaper out the door, and we provide some of the analytics around, for example, I watched the game last night with the college kids, and thankfully my friend's team won. It was a good game. But every statistic in the NBA is sitting in an SAP system, so that
really?
when you hear commentators talk about the NBA, typically they'll be looking at the databases that we provide for the NBA. And with the NFL, if you're a 5-year-old who likes football, I would explain we do all the predictive analytics around the NFL.
I had no idea.
No, exactly. I mean, there's sort of this perception of us as the dad's SAP, which is the old, like 7 of the 7 studios in Hollywood run us for all the financials, 5 run us for supply chain, 3 for rights management. So we're really typically in the back office, progressively moving to the front office. But again, some stats, like 83% of all broadcasting and cable companies use SAP on the back end. 65% of the world's GDP goes through an SAP system.
Wow.
And so we have different industries, media being one focus industry of 25. But Adidas, Nike, Red Bull, Coach, are all brands that we work with across the globe to make the world run better.
I mean, that's DXC, we run the infrastructure for the Fortune 200, and we're large partners because we manage a lot of SAP. So, I know it from the accounting side and running the business side. I had no idea that you get that granular in the media and entertainment business.
Yeah,
that's
and we just did an acquisition, Qualtrics, a couple of weeks ago.
Congrats.
Closed. Well, so, I didn't do it, but you know, for example, they're doing a lot of the analytics around a couple of the major streaming solutions in terms of the customer experience. So as we move, you know, from our legacy in the back to where we see the opportunity in the front office, we're getting deeply into this whole customer experience piece, which if you look around the floor here, the direct-to-consumer, the OTT play, it's going to be all about the consumer experience, plus the fact that you have the best content on the planet. So if you can't find the best content as a consumer, you're likely to go look for it somewhere else. So we're putting a big push, you know, brands like Hulu, brands like Netflix, behind the scenes are using Qualtrics to do a lot of the customer engagement surveys as to how people are interacting with their content.
So how, on an OTT platform, how would that work? I mean, how
so
does that
here,
roll out?
so if you took it from the value chain, right, left to right. So first of all, you got to find a subscriber. So you take them from an unknown to a known to a subscriber. We acquired a company called Gigia that do a lot of identity and consent management. And so we like to think that we can be intimate without being creepy in terms of the customer data. We like to think that trust is that big relationship. So the first part of the direct-to-consumer story would be managing the relationship. And if you think about how the value chain changed in media, it used to be one to many.
Right.
Now it's many to one in terms of the audience of one or the personalization component. That's the first part. The second part, the video transport, the delivery, we would not do. So we would look, you know, for partners like AWS or Azure or Google to deliver the content, you know, to the consumer. But where it gets interesting is around the analytics that are kicked out during that whole value chain. And where it also gets interesting is, I don't know, this is how it works in my house on a Friday night. Been a long week, you go on Netflix, and you know it takes 8 minutes for the average person to find something on Netflix. You find something, no, we're not going to watch that, we're not going to watch that. And then after an hour, your wife and you agree, or your partner and you agree that you're going to watch something. 10 minutes into it, you're asleep. And so, you know, we hope
that never happens to me.
and we hope to really help people find the content as this explosion of content happens. But we also want to
That's the challenge, right? There's such a sea of great stuff to watch. How do you know what to watch? What's the best? And that's where you can help,
and I think,
right?
I mean, it's interesting how, and this is where I see the future of it. The big data part of it is important, but a lot of it comes from referrals. I mean, if you said to me, Steve, you should really watch Widows on Amazon, it was really good. I know you, I like you, we have similar tastes, I'm more likely to watch it. So it's interesting with my friends now, we're all forming these WhatsApp or Facebook groups just to share content recommendations of things that we've seen and liked. But that's not scalable. So I think, you know, Netflix is obviously the king of analytics, but as Disney moves into ESPN Plus and the Disney direct-to-consumer offering, we're going to see a lot of media companies sort of come down to the realization they need to understand the consumer, because there's just so much content out there. And the average attention span of an adult is 8 seconds.
Isn't that frightening?
Yeah.
Thank God this video goes on for half an hour then.
But it skews probably to millennials being like 2 seconds. But a goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds. True story.
So should we target goldfish as the
No,
true
but
consumers?
the question I want to pose to everybody is, who had an attention span long enough to watch the goldfish, right? So, but you know, behind the joke there's quite a serious message that says we are inundated with, you know, news, and we're seeing issues around fake news and the credibility of news. Big data and analytics has a place to play in that. Machine learning has a place to play in that. And then on the long form content, just finding that stuff. You know, one of the things we're doing, for example, in music, is we're working with one of the all three large music companies are our customers, but one in particular is having tremendous challenges managing the amount of streaming data and the monies that are owed.
That's a big problem.
And so, you know, you're looking at somewhere in the region of 120 million transactions that are due at the end of the month to aggregate to pay people the royalties that are paid. And it's not very sexy stuff, but it's stuff that if it doesn't get done...
Hey, money's sexy.
Yeah, exactly, and it never sleeps. Where's that from? Credit to Wall Street 2 there. But no, I mean, if you think about it, you know, these are microtransactions, and there are millions and millions of them happening on Spotify or Shazam, or other music, Apple Music, other streaming services, and then you see Apple moving into the subscription business too. So the whole industry has pivoted towards a subscription opt-in relationship, and that's compounded by what you're also seeing in the market with folks like AT&T buying Warner Media, with Verizon, Oath, and AOL. this whole model now of content is king because ultimately we want to monetize Steve. But to monetize Steve, we have to...
I think my wife does too. So.
But I'm not going there. But you know, you throw me completely off my game here.
Well, I think, you know, I agree with you. Actually, we have the same client that's a music client, and their revenue changed where the majority of their revenue is now streaming, as opposed to, you know, the old selling CDs and things like that, which puts an enormous amount of emphasis on what you guys do.
Yeah, because it's microtransactions at scale. You know, another example would be there's about 12 million inbound transactions an hour into this music company that are micro royalties, and they're too small to pay out, but you have to wait and sit on them and aggregate them so that you can pay them out. So hopefully it's a very smart 5-year-old, because I didn't do a great job at dumbing
He's got that. He's got it down. So, I mean, you come with a worldwide perspective because you had media and entertainment worldwide for SAP. So what do you see in other regions of the world that we're not doing here, that is coming, or what is that trend that you're sensing?
I mean, I think as I look at it, and again, it's difficult to aggregate, so if we just go around the globe. So if you look at Latin America, you're seeing a lot of what you see in North America, a lot of Netflix moving into the territory, media companies trying to figure out how they compete. Do they cooperate and put their content on Netflix, or do they try and stand up the standalone? So, you know, Televisa in Mexico, Global in Brazil, they're going through that battle about, do we jump on board or we do our own thing? And really the answer is probably a bit of both. And Iger and Disney have kind of taken the lead on that. As you move into Northern Europe, you know, Netflix is pretty entrenched in, say, the UK, moving into Central Europe around Germany, although there's still a lot of slower paced, if that's the right term, media companies there that are sort of trying to slow the advance of this down.
Do you find them fighting back, wanting to do their own OTT
yeah, I mean,
aggressively?
it's interesting because what they did, and it sort of reinforces the fact that the center of gravity comes back to the US, a lot of them have invested in offices in Silicon Valley. And
really?
So incubators, like Axel Springer out of Germany has an incubator, Sky out of the UK, which is obviously now part of Comcast, they had an incubator in Silicon Valley. So they invest in some of these small dynamic startups to sort of go around the edge of their core processes so that they can remain competitive. And Asia's a whole different game. I mean, ironically, the news business in Asia, newspapers, is still a growth industry.
Wow.
Yeah, which is interesting as we de-invest in those solutions here in, you know, the mature markets. In India and Latin and Asia, there's still a growth market, which they remind me of every time I say.
We don't need you, we're doing something different.
To the tablet. But yeah, the other thing we kind of see is, you know, this sort of merge between media, telco, and distribution and content production. And that, you know, some of the big telcos in Asia are getting into the content production, distribution world as well. So I think the model will gravitate to direct to consumer, but just at different speeds of adoption. And it really is, in my mind, in parallel to what Netflix and Amazon's strategy is. And Amazon's a completely different beast, right? I mean, most of their revenue from media comes from Prime subscriptions, so they're under a different set of economics.
But something that's really interesting with these guys is they have an enormous amount of data about their viewer. More than, you know, I'm an old broadcaster from ABC. It's like our data was Nielsen ratings that came out a few times a year, and it's like, yeah, you can run your ad here and it'll probably get seen. But these guys have such information about habits and viewing and all that. I mean, that must really change your world.
Well, not so much mine, but everybody's here. I mean, how do you go into this world and not become a commodity in terms of content? I mean, because I would put a hypothesis out there that media is now retail, and that the techniques and the understandings of a consumer that a retail company has are applicable to the top media companies, because they need to treat content as if it's another consumable, which is heresy, and I might not get out of the building alive today, but it's the reality. So being a little provocative on that, yeah, the data, the volume, the velocity, the variety, is there. What's not there right now are the tools to be able to look at that and act upon it in almost real time. So we're doing some stuff, particularly around what we call our digital boardroom, that sits in almost, it's interesting, it's almost like a control room here,
Oh, really?
but for executives and data. So if you look at, for example, some of the
Big
sports...
heat map on the wall. And
yeah, so
stuff.
I'll give you a real example from adjacent, right? For adjacent industry, sports. So the 49ers now have a command center. They took one of their expensive suites and changed it into a digital boardroom for the stadium. So they are monitoring in real time everything from concession lines to parking spaces to fan sentiment,
Wow.
and adjusting that on the fly. Now, that's a sports example dealing with real humans, but the vision I have is that Monday morning or Sunday night, your executive in Hollywood is in the car and they say, Siri, Alexa, what were the box office results for us this last weekend in the Northeast? And we actually have technology that does this, and they'll come back and say, box office was underperforming, and we believe, using predictive and machine learning, we believe the reasons are, X, Y, and Z. We demonstrated the Alexa thing at a studio in Los Angeles that is very familiar with Alexa, and they loved it. So, and then the executive will get to the office, have her or his iPad drill down on the data, and start to make decisions Monday morning that they could probably have not made until Tuesday or Wednesday to impact, maybe in this instance, theatrical spending, marketing spending in lower performing DMAs, to reignite that movie for that second weekend.
Because that's a 2-week spend with a ton of cash, so saving a few million here or there and having it spent more effectively is huge.
And making the data insightful and consumable is our business. So, and then you marry the ability of predictive with machine learning, and you'll face that a lot in this industry where people will say it's an art. It's really a science and an art, right? So the analogy I often use is, if I'm getting on an aeroplane, I want to see, I don't care what the control systems are. I care about what instruments the pilot has, and I care about the pilot knowing what the weather is going to be in 3 hours, not what it was last week. And I think in this industry, we have a rear view mirror of what the data did versus what we want the data to project. And if we are on that kind of field, we're doing it in a very small, non-scalable place with small guys in a garage that have been data scientists their whole life. It doesn't scale. And to answer that long-winded reply there in some ways, those guys like Amazon, Netflix, Google, and Apple are gurus at managing that data and interpreting it.
So we got about 5 minutes left.
Sure.
So I want to ask you on the creative side. So you got a ton of information. You got all this AI. So if I'm writing a script, right, and I've got an audience because it's going to go on, Netflix or someone else, you know enough about the audience. So what are you telling creatives at this point? Because it's really an interesting thing, because creatives say, I want to write. I don't necessarily want you to tell me what to write, but it's a business, right? You have that kind of information.
Yeah, that one's a tough one, right? Because it is the core competency of the industry is to tell, it's all around us, to tell stories. I think it's difficult to...
But you brought up an interesting point. Our attention span is contracting, So if you're scanning Netflix, you want to get your attention, just absolutely, taken advantage of that first few seconds, right? Or you're on to something else.
It does put a lot of pressure. Maybe the application of that is not in the creative per se, but in the trailer. So, if you make the trailer
or the poster even, maybe.
Yeah, and you use the insight that you've got from the audience on the trailers, it's rare that once you're into a movie for 20 minutes, for example, you turn it off, right? It's really that first trailer / oh, that looks good, let's watch that. Where I think it is interesting, and it's sort of a pivot a little bit, is in journalism, where getting the sentiment and the feedback baked into stories about what people want to really understand and what level of depth is interesting. But and in sports, we're working with clients who are looking at how do they use AI to do an edited highlight reel.
Interesting.
So, tennis, for example, they can tell by the faces of the crowd or the cheers that was a good point. So instead of the editor at the end of Wimbledon going through and trying to make the package reel, the machine is doing it in far less time. And then
And SAP can help with that?
We've been working with some of those companies. Other companies that we partner with who are actually here are doing things like that too. Watson, for example, We were doing it more around logo identification in terms of trying to prove to a sponsor that their logo was seen this many times. You could take that to product placement. But yeah, the ability for the machine to recognize things within the reel and create that content, I think, is where it's going to go, less than where it's going to go into storytelling.
Interesting. Very interesting.
So anyway.
So, you know, in closing, what does the audience need to know about SAP? What's coming up this year that they absolutely have to know about?
I mean, I think we're doubling down on customer experience, and I think as we move to a direct-to-consumer model, that understanding, and I use we have a little video of this lady called Sarah. What's Sarah going to like 6 months from now is the question we're trying to help answer. So I think, to answer your question directly, knowing that we're in that space in the front office, that we have the horsepower, the scale, and the global reach to count the money on the back end, and lastly, understanding that we are deep on the data, and we are deep on the insight to action around the data, will be the 3 key things that I think are worth taking away.
I think that's a perfect way to close this segment out.
Thank you, sir.
Richard, I want to thank you so much for coming.
That's good. Thank
Always
you.
a pleasure seeing you.
Thank you for your attention.
And
it's oxygen.
We're going to take a break right now. You're watching the NAB Show Live, brought to you by Broadcastbeat.